As there's not going to be more cows, means we have to get more out of the cows we have. So our next speaker is Troy Walz. He is from the University of Nebraska. He's been on faculty there since 1998, working on beef systems. And he's going to talk to us about the fundamentals of feeding the gestating cow. So we got to make sure we get that cow pregnant and then take care of her, right?
Exactly.
Okay. Dr.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. I'd like to thank the Fraser family and the Colorado Livestock Association. And I'd also like to thank all of you for supporting the industry and the Livestock Association. One of the things I've also done over the years, I sat on the Nebraska Cattlemen Board of Directors. So I appreciate everything that associations do. And like was said, I work with the Nebraska Ranch Practicum. I don't know if any of you have heard of the Nebraska Ranch Practicum. The university has a ranch in the Sandhills. It's 17,000 acres. And the research they do there is systems research. So what I talk about today will all be related to a system. And what that essentially means is what decision I make today, how is it going to affect me tomorrow and in the future? Whether that's with the cattle, whether that's with the grass, whether that's with your economic situation or natural resources, or even your family or your employees. So that's how I'm going to look at this, because we know in our operation it is a system and it's constantly changing based on prices, based on weather. It's always a given. Those are always going to change. So I grew up on a ranch in the Sandhills of Nebraska, north of Ogallala, 45 miles in Arthur County, and was the least populated county in Nebraska at that time. There's less than 450 people in the county, and it was the fifth least populated county in the United States. We always said you don't have to love thy neighbor, just leave him the heck alone out there. So we did that, and we all got along great, and we still do. So my mom still ranches out there. We take in cattle. My dad passed away. And we take in cow-calf, we take in bred heifers and horses. And she has told me, leave me at the ranch, even if I'm eating dog food and howling at the moon. So I told her that would be fine as long as she doesn't start playing with fire. So we'll see how that goes. She's 81 now, and like I said, we take in cattle, and she checks them in the summer and contacts the landowner if there's any problems. And of course, I have the fences and everything ready and the wells. But if she ever calls, I answer because I know it's important, because otherwise she doesn't call. So with that, I will get started today, and I'm going to talk about feeding this gestating cow. And remember, it's going to be on the system. And of course, this is our goal here in the end. We want to have a calf on the ground every year, right? Calf every year, every 365 days, we want that calf. We want that cow to be fed so she's producing milk for that calf. He's going to get his colostrum, he's not going to get sick, and he's going to wean high for us, have a high weaning weight. So the question is, when do we start considering that nutrient requirements of that cow? So we do know that feeding this gestating cow, the nutritional requirements, it's going to affect placental efficiency, it's going to affect organ development in that calf, it's going to affect progeny weight of heifers and steers, it's going to affect puberty in that heifer calf, and can affect also carcass quality in that steer. And we're going to talk about those things. So I think I could spend the whole time just talking about this slide here. We need to know what those requirements are for that cow. Then we need to know that the requirements for the first calf heifer and the second calf heifer are different because they are still growing. And we can't forget that second calf heifer, because if we throw her in with the main cow herd, she's probably going to struggle getting bred back, and your pregnancy rates might be a little lower. We see that happen in Nebraska every year on different ranches. So know what those requirements are, and also think about those periods of high and low nutritional demands. Where are those stress points? Can we always afford to meet her requirements? Or should we be thinking about putting weight on that cow, body condition, fat, when it's easy to do so and affordable, and there are times maybe we can let her slide because we know we're probably going to get to green grass as long as it rains, right? So know those periods of high and low stress. We really do put a lot of demand on that cow. Of course, we have these high stress periods when she's gestating, then into lactation, cold weather stress. Then, like I said, if we have a growing animal, that's a stress period for them as well, because we need to meet those requirements so she can stay in the herd. Then think about your ranch resources. This is important. As we think about systems, we could have two ranches that are exactly the same resources, but they would be totally managed different because whoever's managing that ranch has a different philosophy on how they're going to manage that. They also have different employees. They also have a different financial situation. Some ranches I've worked with are flush with cash, probably not from the ranch itself, but from some outside entity that they brought in. Then we have ranches that they're just trying not to be the guy that makes this ranch go broke because it's been in the family since 1880. Then I had one rancher say, our ranch is expanding quite rapidly. He said that in front of a bunch of poor ranchers, but that ranch is not in business anymore because they didn't have the management. They were new to the industry. So think about your ranch resources. What are some points of leverage that you have for resources? Where are the shortcomings that you have? How can you augment those shortcomings? How can you expand on those leverage points that you have in your ranch? Always be body condition scoring your cows. That's what a good cattleman or cattlewoman does, always looking at the cows, knowing if they're maintaining, if they're gaining weight, if they're losing weight. What does the grass look like? Do we need to think about supplementing? Should we be early weaning maybe, perhaps? What can we be doing different? And think about the cow effects. And what does that mean? Well, you as the manager are affecting your cows by your management. If you ride up over the hill and your cows see you and they can't get to the far end of the pasture fast enough, you're probably affecting that cow a little bit, right? And also the other thing to think about is how you feed that cow. You're affecting her, and then you're going to be affecting that calf as well. What are the calf effects of your management on that dam? You have a big effect on that, and we'll cover some of those things. So as we start off here, I wanted to talk a little bit about what are a cow's two distinct protein requirements. I'm not going to answer it right now. We'll get through this here. But we'll talk about the Natural Research Councils and call it the NRC and the nutrient requirements of beef cattle. Every 10 years, they look at all the research that's been done in the beef industry and they update this publication. The latest one came out in 2016, but back in 1996, there was a shift. And the reason I go through this, I found that it kind of helps people who have cattle that are feeding cattle understand when they feed cattle what they're doing a little better. It's kind of a simple thing, but it makes a big difference on this understanding. And I would say probably one of the most shocking questions I've received was, how do I make my cows skinnier? So being from Nebraska, that very much surprised me. And I just got this question like a month ago. It was from a lady in Indiana. And she sent me her feed stuffs, what she was feeding. And she had haylage, she had silage, she had alfalfa hay, alfalfa grass hay. It's like, oh my gosh. I said, what condition are your cows in? She said 6 or 7 is what their body condition scores are. I said, are you getting good breed back? She said, yes, we are. So I said, well, I don't know if you need to change. You could limit feed. You could sell some of your high quality feedstuffs and get lower feedstuffs. So I'll have to finish that up and talk to her a little bit more about her system. So the other hard question I had was from a rancher in the Sandhills. He said, I don't want you to tell me what I'm doing wrong. I want you to tell me how to make what I'm doing work. So that is a very interesting question. And all that comes down to is providing him with the education and knowledge for him to make his own decisions. And that's essentially what it ended up with. So that's what I like to do. I like to provide information. I really never care what decision somebody has made. I just want it to be an informed decision that they make themselves. I don't like somebody telling people what to do. I guess that's that sandhiller independence that I have. So let's talk about why this change in 1996. They shifted from a crude protein system to a metabolizable protein system. And the reason they did that was the crude protein system assumed that all protein was equal. It assumed that all natural protein that we get from our forages and our grains, soybean meal, was the same as non-protein nitrogen in urea. And we know that's not the case. Urea is broken down very quickly in the rumen. So that is why there was a change. We know in crude protein there's two components. There's a component that's ruminally degraded, broken down in the rumen, used by the rumen microorganisms. Then we have this ruminally undegraded RUP, bypass or escape protein. It's not broken down in the rumen, goes through 4 compartments of the stomach, goes to the small intestines, and is absorbed. So think about that. Crude protein has two components, degraded in the rumen, bypassing, undegraded in the rumen. So this metabolizable protein system that I'll talk about expresses these protein requirements on a degradable protein and a metabolizable protein basis. So hopefully this will make sense. So metabolizable protein equals this bacterial crude protein, which is from the microbes themselves. The microbes, the bacteria, their cell wall is made up of highly digestible protein. And they're reproducing in that fermentation vat, the rumen, which could be 40 to 50 gallons, so huge, trillions of bacteria. And they themselves are a protein source for that cow. And that is made from those microbes being their own cell walls from that ruminally degraded portion. Then we have this undegraded portion, escape protein, bypass protein, not broken down in the rumen. So why are they important? Here it goes, where the cattle have two distinct protein requirements. Have the microbial requirements in the rumen. If we don't meet the microbial requirements, that cow cannot utilize forage as efficient as she should, because cow would starve to death if she didn't have those microorganisms breaking down forages, cell walls, cellulose, hemicellulose, carbohydrates, all of that stuff going on in the rumen. So the cow has microbial requirements, then she has her own requirements, that physiological demand. And she gets that physiological demand requirements from that bacterial crude protein and that undegraded protein that bypasses. So this is a very simple schematic. We know a cow has 4 compartments. She's a ruminant to her digestive system. So there would be 4 compartments, and then it would go from the 4th compartment into the intestines. It doesn't go straight from the rumen. So this is simple here. So we know we have a feed, certain percentage crude protein. We know a portion of that is degraded in the rumen, used by the microorganisms for them to reproduce, produce urea as they're breaking down this, volatile fatty acids that's absorbed for energy. And then those microorganisms live for about 15 minutes. They die. They're passed through the rest of the system and go on down into the small intestines as bacterial crude protein. Then we have this other component, this other fraction of our crude protein that's undegraded, bypasses that rumen. And those two components together are our metabolizable protein. Bacterial crude protein, undegraded protein, that's absorbed across that intestinal wall, and that's used for maintenance, growth, lactation, and gestation. So let's take this a little further. Let's look at, let me mention this. For this to all work efficiently, because there are times in this cow's life, this animal's life, where bacterial crude protein can make up from 50 to 100% of the protein that that cow needs. And it's only going to be efficient as long as there's sufficient energy in this system. So let's look at alfalfa, 17% crude protein from laboratory tests and tests with the animal. We know that 77% of that crude protein is broken down in the rumen, used by the microorganisms, becomes bacterial crude protein. 23% of that is undegraded, bypasses the stomach's rumen, goes to the lower intestines, and is absorbed. So there may be times in this animal's life cycle where she's needing more physiological demand. That would be when she's late gestation, early lactation, or a growing calf or a growing heifer. And as we look at feeds, there are certain bypass values or undegraded portions of values. We know that urea is broken down in the rumen. Corn steep liquor is a liquid byproduct of the corn sweetener industry. Very low bypass, broken down quickly in the rumen. Then we have some low bypass products like soybean meal and alfalfa hay, like I just showed you. medium bypass, cotton cake, cottonseed meal, D-high alfalfa, corn, brewer's dried grains if you ever feed any of that. Then we have some of these high bypass products, such as dried distillers grain from the ethanol industry, corn gluten meal from the corn sweetener industry, or feather meal. So you've heard of all of these things. You can see 60% of that protein or higher in these products bypass that rumen and go directly to the lower intestines where they can be absorbed. So you're essentially directly feeding that cow protein and not the microorganisms. But remember, we always have to be meeting those microorganisms requirements as well. So the question is, why do we meet these protein requirements? If not, she's going to use her own protein and it's going to lose condition. So that's why we meet those requirements. We don't want skinny cows. And of course, if we don't meet these protein requirements and energy requirements, that heifer or cow may not rebreed, and we don't want that to be happening. So I talked about this. When are the nutrient needs the highest? Growing calves, replacement heifers, gestation, lactation. Those are when those nutrient needs are the highest. So let's move on here. So you kind of have that in your mind as we're feeding these animals. So we talked about gestation. That calf is in that cow. And nutrition during this time will play a large role on the calf as well as that dam. So it's during this last 60 to 90 days of gestation, this pre-calving period, where we have 70% of this calf growth occurring. So it's a very important time. So it impacts that calf's survivability. If that cow's skinny when he's born, you have dystocia, you have to trouble with that calf, pull him. He's not going to want to get up and suck. And if she's skinny at that time and has problems, her colostrum's probably not very good. So you're kind of giving a double whammy to that calf right at the start. And we'll talk more about that from some research in Nebraska. Also, how this cow is managed and fed during this time is going to affect her future breeding and reproductive performance, and we'll talk about that. And other than mid-gestation, right after weaning is mid-gestation. This last 60 to 90 days is the second best time to add weight to thin cows and increase body condition score. So this is a very interesting graph. This is the net energy requirements for a 1,200-pound cow. And I have it set here so it's March calving, but whenever you calve, if you calve in February or January or April or May or fall calving, it's still going to follow this same shape as what this graph is. So we see we have their net energy requirements. And then we have the month since calving. So let's go through this and look at it. So we're calving in March, 1,200-pound cow. She's milking 25 pounds a day is her potential for peak milk production. And her peak milk production is going to occur 60 days after calving, 45 to 60 days. That's when her nutrient needs are the highest. That's when she's producing the most milk, and we can see that. So what is interesting, 60 days post-calving, guess what else we're doing? We're wanting to get that cow rebred, right? So we're asking a lot of this cow. She's having a calf. She's milking heavily. She is recovering from having that calf, and she's getting ready for breeding. So we're asking a lot of this cow. And at this point, this 1,200-pound cow probably needs 15 or 16 pounds of TDN, total digestible nutrients, which is a measurement of energy in a ration, and probably needs 2.8 pounds of crude protein at this point. Then you can see as we go months after calving, that lactation requirement starts decreasing. Calf starting to eat grass or wherever the calf is at. He doesn't need quite as much milk. She doesn't have to produce as much milk. So her energy requirements are going down. Then they really start going down till we get to, say, October here for weaning that calf. Now, let me say, if this was a heifer and not a cow, this would be a time to really look at her body condition score right here. And if it's a drought year, the grass isn't there, that could be a time to early wean some calves on a heifer. For a cow, you probably maybe don't have to worry about that. But look at this energy requirement right here. This is right after weaning. That's the lowest her energy requirement is going to be in her year-long production cycle. This is the time where if she is a little bit skinny, this is where you can add some weight to her economically. We want to do it as cheap as possible, right? Because you can see as we get closer to this time when this calf is born, this last 60 to 90 days, we get that 70% of that calf, her energy requirements go back up. So if you're going to put weight on a cow, here's the time to do it. And the other thing is, right here, the weather is usually better, and that's an easier time. And you don't have to really look at these numbers, but it's kind of interesting to look at. This is be the same thing as what I just showed. But as we look at the maintenance requirements from when she calved in March, her maintenance requirement is higher until we wean that calf, and then that maintenance requirement is going to drop off. So she always has a maintenance requirement. All animals do. If it was a heifer, she would have a growth requirement. This is a mature cow. Of course, our lactation requirement is going to go away when we wean, but you can see second 60 days after calving, it's the highest. And then as we look at that pregnancy requirement for energy, it just keeps going up, and gets the highest that last 60 to 90 days. So kind of keep this graph idea in your mind as you think about your own cow herd. Now, I do not expect you to read this, but what I want you to think about is that there is an excellent publication from Oklahoma State University, and it's called Nutrient Requirements of Beef Cattle. It's probably 20 pages long or so, but it has excellent tables in there. Protein that's required for a growing calf, protein that's required for a first calf heifer based on the different weights. And what this graph right here is, or this table, is the nutrient requirements of beef cows. And it shows gestating cow, middle third of pregnancy, gestating cow, last third of pregnancy, lactating cow, first 90 days after calving. And it gives you a predicted dry matter intake, expected calf weight, dry matter intake percent of body weight, and then it gives you the nutrient density needed, percentage crude protein in that ration. The middle third of pregnancy, she needs 7.5% crude protein and 50% TDN diet. She gets into that last third of pregnancy, she still needs 7.5% crude protein, but her energy requirements go up to 50. But what gets really interesting is you look at the different weights of the cows, how their dry matter intake increases, and how the different milking abilities affect her nutrient requirements for energy and crude protein. So excellent table. It's up in the corner there. You guys can Google that and download that. But let's look at this 1,300 pound gestating cow. I pulled out 1,300 pounds. Maybe your cows weigh, anywhere in Nebraska, they range from 1,200 to 1,600 or 1,700 pounds. We have a wide range of cow weight. But let's look at this 1,300 pound gestating cow. Middle third of pregnancy, her dry matter intake, almost 22 pounds. Like I said, 50% TDN, diet, crude protein 7%. And you can see that's 1.64 pounds of crude protein, 11 pounds. Then as we get in that last third of pregnancy, her intake goes up. Her TDN requirement goes up. And because her intake went up, she's eating more TDN and eating more protein. But let's look at this fact of peak milk production. If we have a cow that's peak milk at 25, 30, and 35, we can see that dry matter intake goes up from 32.6. If she's milking 30 pounds, it goes up 2 pounds. And if she's milking 35 pounds of milk, her intake's 36 pounds. And we can see that her TDN requirements, percent of that dry matter ration, goes up from 59 to 61. So instead of 19.3 pounds, if she's producing 25 pounds of milk, it goes up to 22, and the amount of crude protein she needs goes up well. So my question for you to be thinking about in your system, what is your milking ability of your cows? And are you getting the benefit of feeding that cow more TDN, more protein all year long? Are you getting that benefit in weaning weight? If you are, great. If you're not, maybe think about the size of your cow and your system. Find what works the best for you, because it all comes down to economics in the end. Oops. So what is free? We like free things, right? And can be used to determine that nutritional status of our cow. And that is body condition scoring. We should be body condition scoring that cow, looking at how much fat cover she has whenever we're out through our cows, whether we're riding through them, driving through them, have them in the chute, get our hands on them, put our hands on her ribs, feel that. It's an excellent thing to do. It evaluates the energy reserves of fat, and it can be very beneficial for you as you do this for your whole herd. And we'll look at a few things here. We look at the brisket. You usually don't see much fat in a brisket until they get to a body condition score 7, though. But we look at the fat cover on the ribs, and we look at this tail head area and the pins and the hooks and across the back. And kind of the simple way to think about this is the skinnier a cow is, and as she gets fatter, this is what it'll look like. You know, if she's skinny, her back, looking at her from the back, it's going to look like this. And as she gets fatter, it's going to go like this. Then when she gets really fat, it'll be indented down the backbone, and she'll have fat along both sides of her back. So body condition scoring goes from 1 to 9, 1 being probably laying dead on the floor, hardly able to walk, I would guess, to 9 being really fat, which we pretty much don't see in cows. But here's a body condition score of 4. I'd say she's borderline. We can see her ribs here. Not much fat at all on her tail head, probably losing a little bit of muscle in her hind end here. And if we were going to feel along her back, we would kind of have to press to feel her vertebra. So let's look at a 5. We can't see those 4 ribs anymore. If she was shrunk, we could probably see those hind ribs. Starting to get some more fat along her tail head. And a body condition score 5 is kind of what research has shown we want our mature cows to be in at calving. Body condition score 6. Now we can really start seeing fat. Her back's kind of getting more full now and getting fuller in the hind end and more fat along the tail head here. So just always be looking at your cows and what their body condition score is. See if they're going up, maintaining, or going down. And be thinking ahead what you're going to do. If you're starting to see them drop off or if they're maintaining, what your thoughts are going to be. And we recommend first calf heifers being a body condition score 6 at calving. Second calf heifers, body condition score 5.5. So here's the idea. When do you body condition score? I pretty much said all the time, but the ideal time is definitely do it late summer to give you an idea which direction those cows are going, and then at weaning, definitely do it. So for cows, if you have a body condition score less than 5, we know that this is an economical time to put weight on them or fat. We have to meet all their requirements plus add energy to that to put weight on them. A body condition score equates to about 75 pounds of weight on a cow. So if it's less than a body condition score of 5, we know we're going to need to supplement protein and energy because she's going to need energy to put more weight on her. So that's what we need to be thinking about that. And like I said, doing this body condition scoring right now, from this weaning time until 60 to 90 days before calving is the most economical time to put weight on these cows. Now, if we have a body condition score that's 5 or greater, we do know that probably all we need to do is supplement protein all the way up through until she calves. But the thing we have to think about is cold weather stress. If we're going to get cold weather, we're going to have to be adding energy to this. And if it's a first calf heifer, we would be looking at this as a body condition score of 6 instead of a 5. So let's think about this relationship between body condition score and the average interval from calving to the first heat after calving. Remember, our goal is to have a calf, 1 calf a year, right? We don't want it to be born in a year and a half. That kind of defeats our purpose of the inputs and the money we put into that cow, getting her developed from a heifer into our herd. So the skinnier those cows are at calving, you can see body condition score 3. That average postpartum interval day is 89. And if we want a calf born every year, we have to get her bred in 82 days after she calves. And those cows in body condition score 3 to 4s have difficulty expressing estrus in the amount of time that they need to have a calf once a year. So essentially, the better shape that cow is in when she calves, her body can recover from calving more quickly because she can put those nutrients and energy that you're feeding her into repairing her reproductive tract. If she's skinny, she still has to maintain her own body and put some condition on herself before she can think about taking care of her reproductive tract and getting ready for rebreeding. So keep that in mind as well. And that's why we recommend a body condition score of 5 for cows at calving and 6 for heifers. So here's some work from Purdue in 1990. And this is where they found that thin cows gaining condition had the probability of becoming pregnant at 100%. So that's pretty important to think about because maybe your year and winter was tough and you have some thin cows, thinner than you want them to be when they calve, and you know green grass is coming, and you know once they get on green grass, you're going to start putting condition on those cows. So if you had like a 4 when they calved and at the start of breeding they're going to grass and you're on that increasing plane of nutrition, the research shows that you're going to have, that cow is going to be primed better for getting pregnant if she's on an increasing plane of nutrition. So if you have skinny cows going into breeding and calving sometime and you know you're going to get green grass, keep this in mind that they're on this increasing plane of nutrition. That's telling their body that this is good, and we usually get some pretty good breed back. They also saw that if we had moderate 4.5 to 5.5 and it was maintaining during breeding, very high breeding rates, conception rates, but if she was fleshy and was increasing, a little bit less, 75%, but if she was thin and her body condition was going down, we had the lowest percentage. And if she was fleshy, greater than 5 and decreasing a little bit, she had good pregnancy rates. So just kind of something to keep in your mind. But I think the main thing coming out of this was if you kind of have a thin cow and she's on an increasing plane of nutrition, the probability of her getting pregnant increases. But if she's skinny and going down, good luck with that. So the other thing, think about your ranch. I mentioned this. What are your advantages? This is sub-irrigated meadow on our ranch in the Sandhills, so we get good prairie hay every year. But test your forage. If you don't test it, you really don't know what the nutrients are that you're feeding. You're just taking a guess. You could be overfeeding, you could be underfeeding. So test your forage. Forage test costs less than $20 usually, so it's very, very cheap to get that done. And then match that forage quality of that hay with the nutrient needs of your cattle. Higher quality hay for those first calf heifers right before they calve, after they calve. Also higher quality hay for your cows after they calve to help maintain that body condition score so they're not losing. So test your forage, know what you're feeding, and feed accordingly. The other thing I always like to caution people, if you use summer annuals, always test for nitrates as well, because nitrates can cause issues with our cattle, cause abortions or dead cows. So let's think about feeding considerations and protein supplementation. So what we have found that 7% crude protein diet is pretty important for that cow's rumen. Anytime we have 7% or below, those microorganisms are not being as efficient as they could be. And if we start supplementing a little bit, if we have a diet that's less than 7% crude protein on a forage, add a protein supplement, it's going to help those microorganisms be more efficient, so that cow is going to be able to break down forages quicker. Her intake is going to go up, and when her intake goes up, she's able to get more use of the energy from that forage that they're eating. So that 7% crude protein diet is pretty important to keep in mind. The other thing, when we talk about frequency of feeding protein, I'm sure you guys have all heard this, we pretty much see the same benefit if we feed protein daily, every other day, every third day, every fourth day, or once a week. the cow is able to utilize that protein just because she has that ability with her rumen. So the amount and time of frequency for protein, like I said, can be daily, every other day, whenever we do that, or once a week. And that's important for us because that saves on our time and the economics and the cost of us having to feed that. It's not the same for energy, though, and we'll talk about that. So let's talk about energy supplementation now. Starch-based versus forage-based. So we talked about rumen microorganisms. We know that we have microorganisms, we have bacteria, we have protozoa, we have fungi in that rumen. And a cow is usually eating grass. So the microorganisms in her rumen are usually made to break down forages. And then when we start adding something with high starch, like corn or wheat, we start changing over those microorganisms to be carbohydrate or starch digesters. And if we do that too quickly, guess what? We cause the rumen pH to drop, and that makes it more acidic, and that kills off the microorganisms that have been the forage digesters. And if we do it too quickly, it can cause such a low pH that it hurts the inside cell walls of the rumen, and then it can cause foundering issues and causing laminitis in our cattle. So not a good deal at all. So when we think about starch-based, if we're going to be feeding starch in our diets, we probably need to do that every day. We can't go out and feed 6 times the amount and do that once a week. We're going to cause havoc in our cattle. And the other thing too, what the research has shown, that when feeding starch, if it's more than 0.0025% of that ration, so on a 1,000-pound cow, that would be 2.5 pounds of corn, we start seeing depressed intake of forages, because the protein in those forages, and that's on low-quality forages. So if we're going to be feeding corn on low-quality forage, such as winter range or winter grass, we're probably going to have to supplement with some protein as well. So that brings me to the talk about distiller's grains. I don't know if you guys get to feed much distiller's grains here in Colorado, but it is actually in Nebraska we have a lot of distiller's grains, and it truly is an amazing product for ranchers and cattle producers. It's from the ethanol industry. The starch has been removed, so we don't have to worry about converting over the rumen to starch digesting microbes. But the energy in distiller's grains is from digestible fiber and fat. And the energy content of distiller's grains is worth the value. It's 100%, 108% of corn. So it gets the 108% TDN value, whereas corn's about 88% TDN. So very high in energy, very high in bypass protein, and it's very high in protein as well, 32% protein. So it fits very well into forage-based rations. So we use distiller's grains a lot. And on a fiber-based product like that, you'd still probably need to feed it every day for the energy aspects, but if you fed it every other day, you would still be getting some energy aspects, but you can't expect your gains to be as good as if you were feeding it every day. So kind of keep that in mind. Then I also like to talk about sorting your thin cows and your young cows away from your good body condition score mature cows. If you keep everything together and you feed the whole herd to your skinniest cow, guess what's going to happen? Your fatter cows are going to get fatter and probably push away your skinnier cows, and they're probably not going to gain what you want anyway. So if you can sort those out, even if it's an inconvenience for you, I think in the end you're going to get benefits from that. Especially for your first calf heifers and your second calf heifers, feed them separately than from the main cow herd. And I'll talk a little bit more about the importance of that as well. So if you can sort those out and feed those separately to get those body condition scores you want at calving, I would encourage you to do so. And here's the other thing to think about, which maybe you don't know. First calf heifer, she's still growing. In the last 3 weeks before she has that calf, remember that last 60 to 90 days, that calf has 70% of its growth. but her intake decreases by 17% the last 3 weeks before she calves. And the reason for that is she's not a mature animal. She's not big yet. That calf is growing in her, getting bigger, and she just can't eat as much because that calf is taking up room in her inside, so she can't eat as much. So that last month, last 3 weeks, that first calf heifer needs to be fed a higher concentrated diet, essentially, higher protein, higher energy, because of that decrease of 17% in her intake. And if she is being fed with the mature cows, you're not going to be able to do that. So now we need to think about a supplement. This is on our ranch here. We're supplementing distillers grains on the ground. Distillers grains, 32% crude protein, 108% TDN, no starch in it. So we need to determine nutrient needs of our cow. We've talked about that, what stage of production she is in. Then we need to know the nutrient content of the base diet. What is the nutrient content of the forage that she is eating? If you're feeding silage, if you're feeding prairie hay, if you're feeding cane hay, if you're feeding alfalfa hay, or a mix, or they're out grazing a sub-irrigated meadow, or they're grazing winter grass, upland range, know what that base diet is. And then think about how are you going to meet her requirements with a supplement. So think about the type of supplement you can store and purchase. Think about the amount you're going to feed, and think about that price. And you think about that price on a pound of crude protein on a dry matter basis for the protein supplement. If it's an energy supplement, think of it as a pound of energy or TDN on a dry matter basis, and then purchase that supplement and feed accordingly. So at the University of Nebraska with the ranch practicum, we have esophageal cows, meaning they've had a surgery, they have a hole in their esophagus that has a plug in it all year long that we can take out, turn them out to graze, whatever, if it's corn residue or if it's spring grass, summer grass, winter grass. They have this bag, they're going to go out and graze, and some of what they eat is going to fall through that hole in their esophagus, and we are going to collect that. And then we can analyze that, get crude protein and energy of the diet they're actually eating at that time of year. So here is an example. This is for 4 years, and I did these 4 years on purpose. 2012, 13, 14, 15. 2012 was probably the worst drought year we've had in the last 40 years probably. Quit raining in May, over 100 degrees about all summer long, and it never rained again until late fall. But you can see 2012, this is a June diet. Brown was greener the next year, then it kind of evened out. 2012 crude protein was 10%, 61% TDN. The next year we had a flush of weeds that came in, sunflowers and lamb's quarters, very high in protein. So in June, their diet on the range was 19% crude protein, 75% TDN. Cows can eat weeds when they're young like that, no problem. Then the next year, crude protein was 14%, then back to 12%. So every year is different. That's kind of my point. But for the last 20 years, we have been doing this on a Sandhills ranch, and we pretty much know, based on what the date is, what our crude protein in our pasture is going to be. We know what our TDN value is going to be. We know what our rumen undegraded protein value is going to be on percentage of a dry matter basis. That's the bypass protein. We know what the degraded protein that the microorganisms are going to use. So you can do this for your ranch as well. You can go out and take clip samples. A lot of times the clip samples you take are not going to be as high of quality as what the cow takes. Cows are kind of particular. Calves are even more particular. But you can start building what the nutrients are on your ranch, and you can use that as a tool for you. And you can kind of see we range from March, 12%, gets a little higher in the spring, and then really drops off throughout the summer, lowest in the winter to about 4.5% protein on upland range, and then it starts going up. But you can see what the degraded portion of that is, kind of follows that very well. And that undegraded portion doesn't really change a lot. So just know that our forages don't have a lot of bypass or escape protein in that. So to increase body condition, things we have to think about are we have to meet the nutrient requirements for metabolizable protein, have to meet that before we can start putting weight on our cow. So meet her metabolizable protein requirement, meet her vitamin and mineral requirements, but exceed her requirement for energy for any given stage of production. That's how we put weight on a cow. Meet all of her requirements plus add more energy. And to increase body condition, that energy must be fed in a dense enough form that that cow has the capacity to consume it on a daily basis. Now, let's talk about weather. I'm from the middle of Nebraska, and it is colder in Nebraska today than it is here. So this is like a heat wave for me, I guess. But this is important. Stress on cattle in winter can really take condition off of a cow or a heifer very quickly, quicker than you would think. Because the other thing I didn't mention when we body condition score cows, we need to take into account hair cover. Some cows have more hair than other cows. We need to take in whether it's the animal is shrunk. We need to take in whether you're looking at them on a cold day versus a warm day. There's a difference. We need to consider if their rumen is full, their gut fill. We need to think about if they have had a big drink of water. These are all things we need to think about when we body condition score cows. So the energy needs for a beef cow in a body condition score of 5 are going to increase about 1% for each degree below 19 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's in a dry cold. So that's a body condition score of 5. Remember, she has some fat on her. Body condition score of 4, she doesn't have near as much fat. She doesn't have that insulation layer. And her energy needs are going to increase by 1% for each degree below 27 degrees. So that's another reason to make sure your cows are in a body condition score of 5 as soon after weaning as possible, because it's going to help you feeding them later as it gets colder, because we know it's always going to get cold here in the wintertime. Then if we have wet cattle, so fortunately for us, as I've thought about this, we don't have times where we typically have cold temperatures and wet cattle in Nebraska, or probably here as well. But if you do, calculation method is similar, except the starting temperature is 53 degrees and the energy increase is 2% as opposed to 1%. So if those cattle are wet, very drastic. And the other thing I would mention up here, as we think about this, if we have a day or two of cold weather, probably not an issue for us. But when we have extended periods upon extended periods, cattle can lose weight very quickly, especially if they're in a situation where they can't get out of the wind, if they're grazing crop residues, for instance, grazing corn stalk residues. Then if we throw mud into this equation, that causes problems as well. So first calf heifers from our ranch. So first thing I would think about, I would really have caution about this heifer right here. Her head is up. I think she caused us problems for years. We should have sold her the day after I took this picture. But the other thing is, when you look at cows and think about body condition score on a day like today, there would be, or a frosty morning, there's going to be snow on the backs of cattle. The skinnier cows do not have the insulation, and they are not going to have as much frost or snow. That's another way you can point those out. And just looking here, you can see snow on these. Look at this cow right here, this heifer. She does not have, it's melted off of her. So automatically I know this is a skinnier heifer right there, and I could look at them all and see that. So keep that in mind too as you look at your cattle. So calf effects. I talked about how you manage your cow affects the cow, but it also affects the cow. So think if she's in a poor body condition score, she's maybe weak at calving, you have dystocia, we know her colostrum's going to probably be decreased, and this will show this. This is Colorado State University data, but also with dystocia, if you have a weak calf, he's not going to get up and suck. We know a calf has to get colostrum by 24 hours because their gut cannot absorb the immunoglobulins after 24 hours. And you can see that the skinnier that cow is at calving, and this is the amount of IgG, or immunoglobulin G, which is the important antibody we want from the cow to get into the calf. This is how much this calf had in its bloodstream serum at 24 hours old. So if she was in a body condition score of 3 and she calved, we know that calf is already starting off kind of compromised, didn't get the colostrum or antibodies that it needed. Body condition score of 4 is better, and then body condition score of 5. So that's another reason we talk about having your mature cow's body condition score of 5, your heifer's body condition score of 6. U.S. Mark Meat Animal Research at Clay Center, South Central Nebraska. They have 8,000 cows and probably 30 sections of land down there, all different breeds. But they looked at calves that had adequate passive immunity from colostrum to calves that had inadequate levels. And this is what they found. Those calves with inadequate levels had 5 times the greater risk of pre-weaning death, had 6.4 times greater risk of sickness in the first 28 days of life. Colostrum is important, for sure. They had 3.2 times greater risk of sickness prior to weaning, 3 times greater risk of being sick in the feedlot, and that sickness in the first 28 days of life was associated with a 35-pound lower weaning weight. And then once they got respiratory disease in the feedlot, almost 1/10 of a pound lower average daily gain. So what you do to those cows, how you feed those, does affect your calf all the way through, and it's money in your bank account at weaning time. So here's some research done at the university's ranch, Goodmanson Sandhills lab, and this is essentially looking at 13 years of data on supplementing that late gestation cow and how it affects the offspring of that cow. And they followed these calves through, whether it was heifers or steers. And you can see no supplement that last 45 to 60 days. And this was of a distiller's grains product, 30% crude protein cake, 108% TDN. No supplement to that late gestating cow, 1 pound or 2 pounds. You can see on the heifer progeny, we saw a 10-pound increase in weaning weight. We didn't see any increase in puberty status, pre-breeding, or pregnancy rate, but on that 2 pounds over those 13 years when they followed the offspring of these cows that they supplemented late gestation, we had a higher numerical value of heifers calving in the first 21 days. We want all of our cows and heifers to calve in that first 21 days, right? That's 21 more days of calf weight to be put on at weaning. And the other thing I would have you think about too is when you select your replacement heifers, do you select the biggest that you have? Do you select the medium weight or the medium size, or do you select the smallest? That's for you to decide. But here's a question I would pose to you. If you look at when those heifer calves were born, maybe those bigger ones were born in the first 21 days, and maybe they are programmed for better fertility to fit your management style and your ranch, what you have for resources. So keep that in mind as you select your heifers. Maybe you're thinking, gosh, they will get too big, but maybe those middle-sized ones were probably born the second estrus cycle. So keep that in mind as well. So this is fetal programming work. If you want more information on that, look it up. So let's look at the steers. Same thing, late gestation cows, 13 years, no supplement, 1 pound of supplement, 2 pounds of supplement, those last 45 to 60 days. What we saw was, we saw a 10-pound increase from the no supplemented cows to those cows that were supplemented 1 pound in weaning weight of that calf. And then if we look at the weaning weight, we saw a 25-pound increase when that cow was supplemented 2 pounds. So think about how you've fed your cows during late gestation. It can affect your calf with colostrum, and it can affect them weaning weight. Didn't see, and they followed them through to slaughter. No difference in live weight, hot carcass weight, but did see some increases in marbling. So that's something for you to think about if you retain cattle. So just keep in mind what you do to this cow does affect that calf. So here are a few rations as I finish up the morning of my talk for you. So this is a maintenance ration, 250 days pregnant for a mature 1,200-pound cow. Winter range, just rangeland, winter grass that we didn't graze in the summer. Sandhills, it's 4.7% crude protein, 50% TDN, low quality. She's going to eat all she can, probably 29 pounds for this 1,200 cow, and she's going to need supplemented 2.5 pounds of distiller's grains. And this is a maintenance ration, and if it gets cold, we're going to have to up that amount of distiller's grains. So if you get into more central Nebraska, we get more diversified. We have farm ground, we have cattle. So the county I'm from is Custer County, right in the center of the state. We have 100,000 cows, mother cows, and we have 100,000 cattle on feed in the county as well. So we have a lot of cattle in Custer County. Broken Bow is a cow town, by the way. So 250 days pregnant, we could be feeding her cane hay, sorghum Sudan hay, 7.75% crude protein, 15% or 50% TDN. She needs 15 pounds. Feed her alfalfa, 17% crude protein, 54% TDN. She needs 9.5 pounds, and we could be feeding corn grain with this to get that energy for her, 4 pounds. And that would be a maintenance ration for her. So here's an example of a first calf heifer ration in lactation. We could feed her winter range, medium quality alfalfa hay, 12% crude protein, 4.5 pounds of distiller's grains. And this would just be meeting her requirements. And that's 14.4 pounds of TDN and 13.6 pounds of crude protein. So she needs a high energy, high protein diet. So the question often becomes, can we put weight on a cow after calving? The answer is yes, you can. The other question is it economical to do so? And the other question is, what's her milking EPD ability? Because if you start feeding her a lot of energy, her first response is going to produce more milk because she has that ability. And you need more milk for that calf. I don't know. You think about that. But once she meets her requirements, her milking requirement, and then getting ready for rebreeding, and then she'll put weight on. Can you afford to do that? So keep that in mind. So here's a heifer ration. Here's a cow ration. All she can eat meadow hay, adding 5 pounds distiller's grains. This is peak lactation. 16 pounds of TDN and 12 pounds crude protein. So want to talk about fall calving a minute here. Research has indicated, and I showed this, cows breed back best on an increasing plane of nutrition. It's programming in their mind that, yes, this is good, I can get pregnant. So fall calving cows are likely going to be bred back in November. How good of quality is grazing in November? Probably not the best, right? Unless you're grazing some cool season annual that you planted, oats, triticale, barley, or brassicas, turnips, radishes. They're probably not going to be on an increasing plane at that time. And if the forage quality was poor at calving, the cows could be thin, which could negatively impact your pregnancy rates. And the other thing is, if you have a snowstorm in November and your bulls are in with your cows, they're probably not going to be breeding anyway. So keep that in mind as well. So conclusion, if you continually have to play catch up to improve your body condition score prior to calving, something could be wrong with your genetics. Something could be wrong with your management. Something could be wrong with your time of calving, with the resources of your ranch, or it could be a combination of all of those. So keep that in mind and think about one more thing. If you early wean any time in the summer, about 10 pounds of forage is conserved for each day a calf is weaned. So keep that in mind if you need to stretch your grass. So essentially for every 3 days you wean a calf, you're going to gain another day of grazing for that cow. So this is what our ranch looks like in the Sandhills. This was in August. This is our meadow. We do have bales out here. So this is what I want it to look like every year. So thank you. Hopefully I've covered something to make you think about. Oh, an easy question. If not, I'll be here through the break too. Look me up, hunt me down.
Yeah, come up and see Troy. We're going to take break for about 25 minutes. This reconvening at 10:30. foods and speak with our sponsors. Enjoy your coffee and get refreshed.